Welcome to Ideas in Action, the official University of Southern California podcast. This show was recorded live on USC's campus.
Welcome everyone to this week's Dornsife Dialogue. I am sure I'm not the only one here who is guilty of having watched every single episode of Homeland. And from the safety of my cozy house here in Los Angeles, I will admit that I always kind of wanted to be Carrie Mathison. You don't have to be a physicist to recognize that being a secret agent is just simply way cooler than your job. So I was surprised to find out that a real life version of that intrepid terrorist hunting spy is actually one of our own alums. So we just had to get her here to tell us her story. So we are honored to be joined today by that alumna, our own Tracy Walder. Tracy had planned to become a high school teacher when she came to USC Dornsife. And as I understand it, she graduated with a major in history and ended up teaching high school just like she planned. Only after taking a detour in between to hunt down and interrogate terrorists in a number of undisclosed locations overseas. In her book, The Unexpected Spy, she tells this remarkable story, and I can't wait to hear it because I have not read the book. Tracy is joined in conversation today with Peter Mancall, our Divisional Dean for the Humanities. Professor Mancall also got a degree in history and is now a celebrated historian. To my knowledge, at least, he has never taken a detour to fight terrorists, but he does know books. He's written 5 of his own and over 40 book reviews, and he has recently read Tracy's book. So he is here to talk with her about it. Thank you both for joining us, and I will turn it over to Professor Mancall.
Thanks, Amber. Tracy, I'm so delighted to have this chance to speak with you today. I just so enjoyed The Unexpected Spy. I mean, it's just it's a great read. I mean, it's great that you come out of Dornsife, out of the history department. So I thought what we could do is just sort of get started here by just sort of talking about, your life growing up in California, and then we'll talk about SC a bit, and then we'll get into sort of the meat of your book. So why don't you tell us sort of just briefly, about your upbringing and what led you to USC in the first place?
Sure. Dean Miller and Peter, thank you so much for having me. And I'm really excited to be here. USC is a huge part of my life and contributed very much to who I was and who I am now. So I'm just very excited to be here with you. So thank you. So I was born in Van Nuys, the Valley. I was a Valley girl. My father actually went to USC and my aunt went to USC. So the Trojan blood runs thick in our family. And really ever since I can remember, I was watching the Rose Bowl or watching USC football games or going to USC football games. So to be completely honest, I'm not too sure that there was another school that I wanted to go to other than USC. I loved everything about it. Growing up, my parents really instilled a love of travel in us. I was extremely fortunate. Instead of presents for things, we got trips and trips sort of around the world and around the US. So I think I was bit by the travel kind of world bug really early. And my father always sort of had a hobby in loving history, was always giving me Civil War books to read or Revolutionary War books to read. And, I'd always enjoyed history. And growing up, I had a really influential history teacher who made history sort of come alive for me, I guess. And I just decided that I wanted to be as inspirational as he was to me. I spent a lot of time being bullied in high school and middle school and elementary school and just not treated very well. And I think part of me wanted to teach history, particularly at the high school level, so that I could kind of ensure too that what happened to me, didn't happen to future students. So I went to USC and decided to major in history, and I had incredible professors. I took quite a few Chinese history classes and also sort of pre and post antebellum history classes as well in the departments there. And I graduated and went straight into the CIA.
I mean, it's an amazing story. I think, in fact, we have a picture of your graduation from SC, and I think which we're going to pop up for a little bit. Hey, Tracy, can you tell us more about sort of your life at SC? In the book you mentioned quite often, or many times, you're a member of a sorority. You would talk about, sort of riding around campus on a pink bike. Can you tell us a little bit about your undergraduate days, and then we'll sort of transition to talk more about the substance of the book?
Sure. My undergraduate days, one of the reasons I picked USC, quite frankly, is because it had this really wonderful mix of academics, but also, I really wanted the sports teams. I wanted sort of that camaraderie kind of experience. And I would say I indulged in both. I got a lot out of the academic side, but I also got a lot out of Greek life as well. I was vice president in my sorority, extremely involved in it. I was in the Greek honor societies, and I think it's called something else now, but I was a Pepster when I was there, which was part of the Alumni Association. I think it's has a number now attached to it, but I did that as well. And I really enjoyed kind of every aspect of it. And really my recruitment at the CIA is really because of a sorority sister. We were riding our bikes down Truesdale Parkway, which I'm thinking students still do today from our sorority house. And they used to set up kind of career fairs along Truesdale Parkway. And there was a table that said CIA. And I just felt sort of drawn to it. They were looking for history majors. And so I gave them my application.
That's perfect. I mean, I just love the idea that you're pedaling down Truesdale, those job fairs, which are still there, they're incredibly crowded, people on all sides. And yeah. I'm sure that you were one of those more careful students who didn't run over the professors, while she was bicycling across campus.
No, I never did that.
Of course not. I know, which is great. And I'm sure everyone listening is also in that group of safe bicycle riders, so it's all good. So you left sort of, I think a lot of people think of SC, we think of the beautiful campus that we all enjoy so much, as really being worlds away from your next, what you did next. So talk to us a little bit about the transition from being a Trojan to being a spy.
And, as Dean Miller had said, I really did want to be a high school history teacher. That was sort of my goal. But I think as I was exposed to different folks within my sorority house or friends that I had met outside of my major, I started to wonder, are there other things that I could use my history degree to do, law, museums, those kinds of things. And I actually started interning at a museum nearby. And I started looking at different ways that I could apply my degree. And because I knew right at that moment, I didn't want to just go straight into teaching. And so for me, a pivotal moment was I was sitting in the Delta Gamma sorority house at USC, and Peter Bergen was interviewing this guy named Osama bin Laden. So this was 1997-ish. And I started thinking, who is this? And I started wanting to know more and more and more about what the Middle East was. And I think for me, we have to remember the world was a really different place in the late 90s. We didn't have Homeland or Criminal Minds or those kinds of shows in pop culture. We didn't even have the brand new James Bond. Right. So I had no real preconceived notions of really what the CIA did other than sort of Cold War stuff. Right. Because that's what I had grown up with. And so for me, when I went to that career fair and saw that they were looking for history majors, I viewed it as, this is a potential another application of my degree. And I thought, well, this will be interesting, see what they are about, see what I could do with them. And sort of that's really what piqued my interest.
That's amazing. Okay, so you put in your application and you go through the interview process, and I'm guessing there was some kind of background check. I certainly hope there was some kind of background check.
Oh, yes.
Make sure you weren't going to be yes. Some sort of mole, whatever. So you passed through that, and then you're going to the CIA. So in the book, you're really good about sort of talking us through the steps of how you became an agent, in the CIA, but also how you maintained a real sense of yourself. And, in ways that I think may be surprising to people who haven't read the book or people who haven't seen you before. You talk in the book about, your personal appearance, and sort of essentially finding your, I guess what we would sort of say, your personal space within the CIA. Can you, and I think that you found the CIA a fairly welcoming place for a lot of that. Can you sort of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the CIA was an incredibly welcoming organization. And to be honest with you, I owe a lot of that to my recruiter, who I met that day on Truesdale Parkway, and who kind of shepherded me throughout sort of the whole process. I applied in late part of my junior year, and then it took about 5 months to clear. And I had the conditional offer employment by November of my senior year, actually. So for me, he had always, I had had a lot of doubts, why do they want a history major? I don't have a military background. I, didn't have this, prominent athletic prowess. I sort of was, I guess, talking myself down a little bit. And I think he was the one who instilled in me that there are no stereotypes of what should be in this industry. You need to go into it and you need to give it a shot. And I think that's what was so great about the CIA is a lot of times the gender narrative, particularly in, the CIA and the FBI on, I guess, the more operations side, which was what I was in. The gender narrative sometimes skews more male. And I think females think that they're not jobs that they can do and still be feminine. And I guess, my message is that it's okay to be feminine and you can still excel at these jobs. And I think that was really important to me.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really, I'm reading the book. I am also a huge Homeland fan. And I'm reading the book and I'm sort of thinking of Carrie Mathison and seeing you describe actually some things that the show, also represented, the idea that women have to have a different public appearance in the Middle East than men, that you in the agency were in a minority in terms of your gender, overwhelmingly male, and you tell various stories about being snuck in here and snuck in there. I mean, really amazing things. But reading through it, there's this very powerful authorial voice, sort of recognizing, cognizant of sort of the gender aspects of it. And I wondered how much of that, how much of that was spoken when you were there, or how much of it was sort of subtext that you were thinking about while you were out there.
I think it depended on where I was, depended on what I was doing. At the agency itself, in the course of my, I guess, day-to-day boring work, I know this might disappoint some folks, but you do work in a cubicle when you're not overseas. I realize that's not sexy, but you do work on a cubicle. So I would say just in the day-to-day, no, it wasn't something that came up on a daily basis. I had a really great boss who didn't care about your gender, or, it was all about your abilities. So no, but when I traveled overseas, obviously I was very aware of the gender dynamic, depending on where I was, and was always worried about how I would be perceived by other intelligence agencies, by other assets, and by other individuals in those countries.
Well, actually, Tracy, I think we have a picture that demonstrates that you weren't always in a cubicle.
Yes.
So if we can pop that up, I think people will get the sense that, that your life was not sort of as we think of the typical sort of office life.
Yes. So I had just done debriefing there, which is why I was wearing all black. And I think I had my hijab kind of on my head, but not really. And I had on a bulletproof vest there.
Talk to us a little bit about why we're seeing those squares over the faces of the others. Because one of the themes of your book is, what are you, now that you're not there anymore, what are you still allowed to say or to show? I thought that was really a fascinating part of your book. But so can you talk to us about that?
Sure. So my book,
about the sort of culture of secrecy, if that's the right word. Yeah.
Sure.
Please.
When I was there, I was what's called an overemployee, so I could tell people that I worked there. However, when I traveled overseas, I went overseas in a full alias. So when you read my book, there are what you would see are redacted sections. When you leave the agency, you sign a non-disclosure agreement that anything you publish will be vetted by them. So I submitted my book to them. It actually took 5 rewrites to get the redactions down to the place where you see them now. I was very surprised at some of the things that they allowed in the book, and some of the things that they didn't. What I came to find out is that the amount of redactions was mostly because it was giving away too much locational information about where I was. And since technically Tracy was never there, we couldn't give away the locational information. So the reason that those women's faces are blacked out is because one of them is still with the agency, and it's not appropriate at this point to reveal her identity. And the other one does not want her identity revealed as being associated with the agency. So I try to be respectful of that.
I do have sort of question of, historian author talking to a historian author, and that is, I thought it was brilliant, the choice to leave the redacted part in the text.
Oh, thank you.
I thought that was an amazing decision.
Thank you.
Because it really gives you a sense of, I didn't know, I didn't catch on that you'd had to go through 5 versions before we got to the version that we saw. Although that does make a lot of sense now having read the book. But I love the idea that, you're doing it and there's still these things. But I'm just curious, did you have conversations with your editor, basically, where you said, I want this stuff that in the book, even though there's going to be these series of black lines? What is the editorial discussion of that? That's something that
great question.
You'll not have to deal with.
That's a great question. So for me, it was a very interesting process with my editor. For me, I was coming in on the heels of 2 analysts. I didn't serve on the analyst side, but they've become actually really great friends of mine who had actually had their books denied completely, not allowed to publish them. And it had taken them almost 2 years, I believe, to sue the agency and gain publication. So for me, when I received the manuscript back, even though it had 4 chapters completely blacked out, I was so happy because they didn't deny it in full, right? And I think we went back and forth with them. I appealed a few of the chapters, and I was happy to keep going. It was actually my editor who decided that they wanted to publish it by that point the way that it was, because what they were worried about is if I submitted it to the CIA again, it opens up the opportunity for them to deny it in full again. So I think at that point they put a time on it and said, you know what, we can read this. This is a intelligible piece of literature. Let's go with this.
Yeah. Well, it was a great decision. So kudos to you and your editor for sorting that out. Tracy, without pinning you down on a question you can't answer, you give us chapter titles which give dates. You were out in the field for approximately how long? Can you reveal that?
Right. So for me, it was weird because September 11th happened, sort of a year in, and they stopped what we call 2-year TDYs or, 2-year overseas assignments because they couldn't afford to have people in the counterterrorism center gone for 2 years. So I have to more add up the months, right, that I was in different countries because I was just going all over the place. So I think if we added up all those months, it would be a year and a half, almost 2 years.
Okay. And you were in the agency then for time beyond that, all the time you were in the U.S.
Yes, so I was in the agency 4 years. I'd say 2 of it was overseas.
Okay, well, without revealing too many of the plot points in the book, because it's such a good read, I don't want to reveal too much. From the cover, we know that at some point you decided to leave CIA and to basically come home, or at least come back to the United States, and made what to a lot of people who are not in this intelligence world seem like the logical choice. I'll go to the FBI, right? Just make a certain amount of sense. But I think that transition maybe wasn't as smooth as you had hoped. Is that a fair way of putting it?
That's correct. So for me, I left the agency actually on really, really good terms. I won a lot of awards when I was there. Some of my best friends are there still. I was in a really good position, right? And so it's hard to leave something when you're in a good position. But strangely, at age 25, 26, I had this foresight that I knew that for the rest of my life, I couldn't maintain traveling to different places pretty much every month or every other month. It just wasn't something that I felt that I could do anymore. And I knew that, that's the core of what the agency does. My parents always taught me, don't leave because you have a bad manager or bad, leave because there's just something about the job that's never going to change. And that was what it's never going to change. So I thought, well, I'm very passionate about the counterterrorism mission. So why don't I do that where I know I'll stay in one place stateside? And so I felt that the FBI, becoming a special agent there, would be the most logical step at that point. Obviously, it was a completely different environment. And it's funny, I've tried to do research to find women who have served as operatives at the CIA and at the FBI, and I haven't found any yet, but I know that there are some out there. But it's an unusual move to make, I get that. But I didn't realize that there was such a difference in the intelligence community and the law enforcement community. That was naive on my point.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about you talked about the CIA being very welcoming.
Mm-hmm.
And you say that in the book, and really sort of and I guess, and this is sort of counterintuitive because not everyone would think, especially after watching Homeland, I wouldn't think, oh, the CIA, that's a welcoming, warm and fuzzy place to go. I'm thinking might be a pretty tough place to work, and especially being out in the field, those conditions are pretty challenging. But through the book, you retain a pretty optimistic tone when you're talking about the CIA. Tone changes a bit when you get to the FBI. And I think it starts from your introduction to the FBI, to the training. And I wondered if you just wanted to talk about that, sort of the different cultures of the two institutions.
Sure. It's funny. I really debated, actually, I guess, an editorial discussion. I really debated putting the FBI stuff in my book. It was a hard decision to make, but it was the right decision to make because, it's my lived experience. I'm sure not everyone had a positive experience at the CIA either. So, I'm sure it's all over the place. But for me, what had happened is I had come from an environment, obviously, that was welcoming and that really, if you were the right person that was talented enough to do this job, you were doing it. It didn't matter who you were. But what had happened to me was on basically day one of the FBI was just endemic sexism and harassment to the point that I probably should have just quit the academy. But, I'm not a quitter. And so I graduated from Quantico. But it was really interesting because I've reflected a lot on sort of why that happened. And I think that for me, it started really at the top with my class supervisor, almost encouraging it. There is a little animosity between the CIA and the FBI. When I was at CIA, I didn't experience it as much because I was in a center with FBI agents, and so we got along just fine. But what I didn't realize was that he started spreading a rumor that I had never worked at the CIA, which I always found fascinating because they had to come to CIA to conduct my background investigation, which was crazy. They would constantly, if there was a really tough arrest scenario to do, they always put me to do it. They would try to set me up for failure constantly. And what's fascinating is my entire training, my entire time at Quantico was actually videotaped. And I've watched them since then, and you can hear the harassing that they're doing to me behind the video. It's painful to listen to, but it was interesting.
Wow, that is amazing. Hey, since we're talking about the less pleasant aspects of some of your still young career, thinking back across the agency and then into the bureau, can you think of moments that were sort of particularly harrowing, particularly scary, memorable? You've had a lot of experiences. You tell a lot of really amazing stories in the book. But were those moments where there's sort of, that sort of soul-checking moment? Did you have, I know you had some of those because you talk about the book, but you want to talk about one or two of those?
Yeah. So, when you're in your 20s, I think you feel a little invincible. So I think I did that soul checking a little later on in life, about them. So for me, a couple definitely would have been when I was there's a chapter in my book called The Vault, which was it still is classified, very highly classified program that I was one of the first people to work on. And I would say the night that we lost bin Laden in the mountains of Tora Bora was obviously a really profound experience, because since I was on duty, I think you feel a sense of failure, a little bit. I think also debriefing terrorists was quite the eye-opening experience.
I mean, you want to talk about that a little bit? I mean, I don't think I think it's going to drive more people to read the book because the details are in the book. But do you want to talk about that a little bit? I mean, that is kind of, it was you render this in a very sensitive way in the book. I mean, it's obviously a very difficult room to be in, and you handled it with incredible professional skill. Do you want to talk about it a little bit? I mean, it's got, it gets a lot of popular press. Maybe you can clarify some perceptions about what it was like to be an actual agent in a room with an actual terrorist suspect.
It definitely was surreal. I think, you have to look, I know enhanced interrogation is, a big topic, whatever. I don't support it, but I think we have to look at the purpose of it. The purpose of it was just simply to get these folks to be compliant, right? It wasn't to get information out of them. I came in to get information out of them, not to make them compliant. So I sort of I'm not absolving myself of responsibility, but I just want to sort of separate the two and what I did. And so my job was to get imminent threat information from them in a quick and effective manner. And so for me, what that entailed was very quick rapport building, and not rapport in the sense that I want to be their best friend. I obviously don't feel badly for the situation that they're in, but you have to try to either be a good listener and find some common ground. I think that's one way that females sometimes fare better than males in those types of jobs. Not that we're better, we're just different. And I think my listening skills and my ability to read people real quickly helped me in that. I would find out, what were their favorite foods, what were their favorite fruits, what were their favorite things to talk about. And I would arrange discussions about those, or arrange for them to get that orange that they really wanted, or that package of M&Ms that they really wanted. And it establishes a very quick rapport with them, so I can start diving into questions and get honest answers from them. It was an interesting experience. I had one that told me, I'm Jewish. I'm not deeply religious, but I'm Jewish. And I had one, I asked him just a very basic question. Why do you hate Americans so much? I mean, don't most people kind of want to know the answer to that? And it wasn't that. He said to me, no, I really just hate the Jews. And I was like, do I tell you now or later? I'm Jewish. But I would say the most profound discussion that I ever had with a terrorist is I actually asked him, why did you get into terrorism? That was an eye-opening moment for me. And for him, it was because the state or country that he lived in didn't provide him the things that he needed. He was destitute. His parents had abandoned him. He had hepatitis. He didn't know how to read. He didn't know how to write, and he was starving. And so Al-Qaeda came in and said, hey, we'll send you to school, we'll feed you, and we'll teach you English and Arabic. And I didn't understand. It's not something I would ever get into, but it was kind of an eye-opening moment for me to realize the station in life that he had been in prior to joining Al-Qaeda.
Well, I think that sort of actually reveals one of the things that I really found among the most rewarding in the book, which is that, the book reads on one level as you telling this amazing story. But, when you read carefully into the book, you're also very adept at sort of picking up the psychological undertones, and you did it in a way I found very impressive, in that you very much, you never sort of went into politics, politics with a capital P. You met a lot of prominent people. You mentioned them in the book. But, you never sort of, you never take a cheap shot at anybody in the book. And, you're much more inclined to read their characters. And it comes off, in a very sort of straightforward prose, but it has these various levels. So that's just a compliment.
That was really actually important to me.
So following from that, my question now is, because I got to know, did studying history help shape the way that you looked at the experiences you were having, like that undergraduate history experience with us? I mean, how can you look back and say, yeah, by doing X, I can see Y. I mean, do you see a connection there?
If you want me to be perfectly honest with you, I think history is really one of the only reasons that I was decent at what I did. History is what exposed me to want to learn about something that I was either unsure about, confused about, didn't know anything about. And, I think for me, history is political, but not with a capital P, right? It's objectively looking at things. And I will never forget you have to submit a writing sample when you join the CIA or when you apply. And I remember what I submitted was a history paper, and I took a risk. And the risk I took was I picked a paper on why a communist style of government worked for a country like China. I remember my dad thinking, why did you do that? Like the CIA, like, why would you do that? But they said to me that way of thinking in a full 360-degree view from a historic perspective is exactly what they wanted. I took my personal preference. I have personal government styles that I prefer over others, but I was able to separate that from just the facts of historically what China had gone through. And they kept coming back to that essay, and so I actually really credit my study of history with being able to do that.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so let's stick on history for a minute, because we've talked about, SC, going into the agency, going into the bureau, but then you left the bureau and moved, you sort of went full circle back to your original plan, which was to become a history teacher.
Yes.
Which was, which was just wonderful to see. And you can tell us about that. I mean, that has to be some pretty interesting transition. I mean, first you're biking down Truesdale, and then you're in the CIA. 9/11 happens. You're back and forth to the Middle East. You do that for some time. Then you go to Quantico. You deal with all of the things that you dealt with there, which you write so beautifully about in the book. You go back to California to go out into the field, for the bureau, and then you decide enough of that. I want to go back. So let's talk about that. So sort of the last part of the book, it's just so inspiring, the last part of the book. I mean, as a man, obviously, I can't go, be your student in an all-girls school. But I mean, your relationship with these girls is really remarkable. So can you tell us about that transition? Because I found at the end that you sort of then bring that life experience into the classroom, which I thought was fascinating.
So I first started actually teaching at the public high school that I went to. I'm from Irvine, California, so I'm from Orange County. And I actually went back and started teaching there. I taught, AP history mostly. And I found that there was this tremendous interest in what I used to do. But the interesting thing was a lot of parents felt that I was embellishing. They didn't believe that I worked the places that I did, which was, it was crazy to me, but I understand now, where that was coming from. And I started to realize just in the curriculum that there wasn't a lot out there that wasn't focusing on Western Europe. And I was becoming slightly frustrated with that, because obviously there's more to history than just Western Europe. And most of my time was spent in Africa and the Middle East. And so once I moved, I left California and I moved to Texas, I started teaching at an all-girls private school. And at the school, you have a little bit more autonomy in terms of the classes. I still kept teaching AP courses, but I realized that these girls didn't have any exposure to the Middle East and Africa and foreign policy and diplomacy. And so I created a course on terrorism, foreign policy, and national security. And it was really one of the first of its kind at the high school level. And as a result of that, these girls were making policy. We were putting policy papers together for our congressmen on bioterror threats, and sending it to them. And it was super rewarding. I recently gave a talk at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. in February. And over 40 of my students, former students, came, and now they're at the FBI, they're at the CIA, they're working at the Department of Homeland Security, all those types of agencies. And I think I started realizing that this is a great way that I can apply what I did. women are significantly underrepresented in these careers. And it's not that they're better and it's not that men are bad. We just need even representation because their voice needs to be heard. And I think when women don't see the women leaders in these careers, they don't feel that it's a career that they can pursue. And so I kind of, I guess, created my own little farm at my school of women to go into these careers.
Tracy, congratulations on the book. I look forward someday to meeting you in person, socially distanced perhaps, but nonetheless to actually meeting you in person, because I really felt I got to know you a bit by reading the book and more in this conversation today. So thank you for sharing your time with Dornsife. It's really been a wonderful experience.
Thank you so much for having me and for all the amazing questions, and for everyone who's watching for all of your questions. I really appreciate them.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and visit us at podcast.usc.edu.